Hey everybody, it's Bust with our patch notes review for the 4.11 patch. This is the variety patch coming out of the Fates Voyage Onward set and helps usher in the Eternal season. And so it's going to be quite exciting. It has a Titanic set of new units, if you will, a lot of changes to both the Eternal and the standard format, and then the spoiling of some new cosmetics that will be coming out quite soon. Also quite interesting to me with this and the impact this variety patch is going to have is typically when the variety patch comes out, we only play Eternal that month. But with this month having the Eternal open 2 weeks away or so, immediately followed up by the World's Last Chance Qualifier, which goes back to the standard format, I'm kind of interested to see how the variety patch affects the standard format, since it's not something we typically at least tool around with on our channel, since there's not a ton of reason for us to play standard during this month. And so I'm very excited to see how this mixed meta pans out and how these changes within this patch affect both formats moving forward. And so to dive into the cards, we start off with what is my selection for the strongest card coming out of the variety patch, and that's going to be the Enraged Fire Spitter, this wonderful Noxus dragon you can see up at the top of the screen. And so as it stands, just on the standalone playability, an 8/4 Challenger unit for 6 mana isn't that spectacular. It's not that great of a deal. It's kind of stat efficient, but it also kind of dies to everything. But when you start to tie in that it has the elemental playability to deal 2 damage to an opposing unit and the opposing Nexus, it also has the dragon subtype. It just starts getting into tons and tons and tons and tons of things that this card is capable of doing, whether or not that's playing it with elementals, playing it with flow, playing it with something like Annie, playing it with plunder, playing it with some kind of Warden of the Tribe subtypes matters kind of thing. Like, you just get into an innumerable number of things that this card actually comes down and activates, that it really should come in and help make up for that lack of health that this unit is carrying along with it. Also, being within Noxus, you can very easily give this dude Overwhelm and have a very powerful game finisher at a very cheap price. To the best of my knowledge, this is the current cheapest Titanic unit within the game. And so as it stands, if you want to play a handful of Sigil of Volley Bears, whatever those things are called, to get this guy down to cost, like, it's very easy to play him for 4 or 5 mana, to whereas, you know, dropping a big dragon for 4 mana is super impactful because you can do a bunch of other stuff within the same turn, to where if you make your 9-drop cost 7, you're still only playing that 1 card on the turn. And so I am super excited to see what comes out of the Enraged Fire Spitter. This really strikes me as being the most powerful addition to the game coming out of the variety patch. But the one that could potentially give the Enraged Fire Spitter some challenge, some fight in terms of the strongest card is going to be Rusticle's variety card. If you didn't catch the Rusticle's article, the Dev for a Day article, is very fantastic, learning about him and the process in designing the Trusty Ednair. And this is another one that has a lot of potential power. If we're going to land ourselves in a format to where people don't want to interact too much, then this card will completely annihilate you. And so I start to look at it and think of things like Lulu and the support stuff out of Ionia. That's maybe not enough. But there are a lot of other support themes running around. If you want to figure out something to do with Mountain Sojourners, then more power to you. I think there's a lot of possibilities for these cards. And so the Ionian aspect is not something that I'm personally capable of brainstorming and brewing well on. I just literally play absolutely no Ionia, so the angles and the viewpoints on really elevating Rusticle's card just slip my brain. But it does strike me as a card that's going to be quite powerful. Maybe you use it with Bard, maybe you use it with support, maybe you use it with Mountain Sojourners, maybe you use it with something like War Chefs. Like, there's just so many things that can come in and make access strengthen these abilities that something is surely going to pop up. Moving forward, we run into a big collection of Titanic bros, a big grid of Titanic dragons all over your screen. We'll go through those one by one. And so the Chemtech Drake, I'm not particularly impressed with. One of the problems that you'll run into with these big expensive cards is they need to do something immediately, right? And so if you spend your 8 mana on a unit, it has to do something. It can't come down and just get vengeanced or get Will of Ionia and sent back to the hand and not do anything. It needs to do something. And that's my problem with the Chemtech Drake. It does have this very powerful ability that when you play a spell, you draw 1. If your hand is full, you deal 1 to the enemy Nexus. There is probably some kind of combo tied in with the Chemtech Drake, but at the end of the day, a lot of the games you're winning with the Chemtech Drake's draw ability, I feel like you've already won that game anyways. Like if you have some kind of game to where your hand is completely full, you're drawing additional cards and dealing damage to the opposing face, that game's already done. You already won it. And so there may be some kind of combo aspect on the other piece of the puzzle, the when you play a spell, draw a card, or when you play a spell, draw a card. But I feel like at that point, if you're out here brewing with Swindler's Den or whatever you're trying to do to pull this off, if you have the draw your entire deck combo, you've probably already won that game anyways. And so I'm not particularly impressed with the Chemtech Drake. It just doesn't strike me as doing enough when it comes on the board. Now, in kind of direct comparison to that, Boardir of Blackened Ice, Boadir, Riot should come through and just let me pronounce all the cards within the new set as they come out and see what just happens. And so we have Boadir, the Blackened Ice, the Freylordian Dragon. And this one is actually very interesting to me. It does crazy stuff with Talia and Lysandra for sure, but just having this guy on his own is incredibly, incredibly powerful in the sense that it just ends the game on your next attack token. And so if we're on the evens, we play the dragon on 8. When we roll back around to our next attack token and we have the 2 Frozen Thralls on the board and countdown complete, you're just going to win the game at that point. But you know, if you're able to drop the dragon a turn or 2 earlier, whether or not that's with ramp or with Volibear Sigils or whatnot, dropping this unit on turn 6 and then ending the game on turn 8 is a very real possibility. And you're not even doing anything else, right? You aren't using Talia Lysandra combos. You aren't using things to reduce the countdown on this card. You're just playing it and waiting 2 turns, right? So you can play Harsh Winds on your opponent next turn and then just win the game on the follow-up. Like, it's a very, very, very powerful thing to summon these 2 Frozen Thralls and advance them to 2. It's advance to 2, not advance by 2, right? So the countdown is going to be 2. The countdown isn't going to be 6 or 7 or whatever it would be at with a -2 cost. And so I think this unit has a whole lot of potential, especially if we find ourselves in a very mid-rangey kind of format where we're both just trying to see who can do more powerful things than the other person. Getting, what is this, like almost 50 stats for 8 mana is incredibly, incredibly powerful. You just need to look back to Warden of the Tribes to think how strong that can be. So up next, we have the Dune Swallower, another extremely, extremely powerful card in the space of Eternal. Like, making this land in Standard, I'm not currently seeing it. I don't know if the cards exist to make this work in Standard, but in the space of Eternal, I think this is going to be a very quick meta shake-upper, a very shake-upper to the meta. There's just a number of decks that would be excited to have this running around. Anything with Kindred in it is excited to have this thing running around. You can come in and play the enduring Last Breath guy that comes back over and over and over again, really get the Slay combos going. And the Slay combos can also come in, tie up to Nasus, and then when you say, oh cool, I'm used to playing Nasus, I can play with Atrocity. When you think of Atrocity, you can cycle back to the Dune Swallower and go, oh, I have a 9 mana unit with Spell Shield that's ready to be thrown at the opponent's dome. And so, I initially thought of this card, it's like, well, it doesn't elevate to like Elusive Overwhelm or Rally. We aren't quite there with Fearsome to where this unit is a truly scary card. But as we kind of cycle back to that Noxen Dragon that we were initially talking about, to where at initial glance in terms of like stats to cost, it's kind of fine, but kind of weak, whatever. But when you start tying this in to be like, okay, I activate Slay abilities, I activate Titanic, I activate Kaisa maybe to some degree, I activate all of these different kinds of strategies to where we can say the kill an ally is upside, then I think you get into a very interesting card, especially in Eternal where you have access to Atrocity. And so that's why I say I don't really see it in Standard. Standard tends to be kind of like too mid-rangey for these things, to where you don't have Atrocity, you don't have all the combos. You can't just, attack this into your opponent's 2 mana unit and not deal any damage. That all kind of sucks. But as we look into the space of Eternal, I think this card is definitely in the space for an Eternal Shakeup. And as we just look at Shurima on its own, Shurima is getting a very interesting mix of just high-powered spell shieldy kind of units. There's the Ruin Runner, the 6/3 Overwhelm for 5 mana. There's a variety of spell shield units along the way, and so they have some very interesting ways to attack the control decks of the meta by loading up on spell shields. I think it's a very powerful Eternal, very standard meh. Moving over to the Kingfisher, the 9 mana Demacia card, always the greatest card in the set just because it's in Demacia, but it is an extremely powerful ability attached to this boat, the all-champion boat, if you will. A 9 mana 8/8 that when summoned, you draw one of each champion within your deck, which is a pretty good value, but you know, it is in that space of a 9 mana do nothing unit that comes down and doesn't really get any attacks in. But the next line is the real key, that each round, the first time you summon a champion, rally. That is an extremely, extremely powerful ability, especially if we're doing stuff like dropping the Kingfisher for 7 or 8 mana because we did stuff with sigils, and then next turn we just attack. Jarvan comes down to hand. Jarvan hits the board because he's the first champion that we've summoned on the turn, and that activates a rally, and we just get to attack again. Like, very, very powerful stuff with this guy. Like, even if it's, say, you know, he's reduced in cost by 1, we have 1 copy of Lucian in our deck, so we spend a lot of mana to play the Kingfisher. We then play Lucian for 1, get the rally and attack, and then next turn we attack again, have that Jarvan come down and give us another rally. Like, it is an incredibly, incredibly powerful set of rallies and high-powered attacks that you can pull off with this thing, assuming that we're able to get to that stage of the game. And so I do like that it has a lot of built-in high-powered stuff directly into the card, as to while, you know, we play it and it doesn't immediately win you the game, it should probably win you the game if you're playing the right suite of champions within your deck. And so I'm very interested to see what we can do with the Kingfisher, if the 9 mana is just too much, or if we're forced to play some rampy style stuff to get this one going. But being the Demacian one, you know that we're on board with it. Another very interesting one in Portia the Peculiar, a 9/9 do nothing for 9 mana, which is a bit of a whoops, but has the play ability to manifest a Titanic follower, set its stats to 1/1 and its cost to 0. And so with this, it's very tough for me. This is a card that feels like the boat, into where we need to play it and then it needs to immediately win you the game. But how often is it doing that, right? When it comes to playing the Demacia boat, we just know what we're getting ourselves into, right? We're going to draw 1 copy of each of the champions in our deck. We know how that's going to influence what happens. But when it comes to Portia the Peculiar, it's very tough to determine if there's going to be any like really sweet combos that you want to do immediately, right? And so you can hit Commander Ladro, sure. You can hit some of these other really high-powered cards, but you can also find yourself in the space to where you're just like, oh man, I hit a bunch of like combat-centric units that are only going to become 1/1s. And so, you know, I'm a little up in the air with Portia. I feel like there's no denying that this ability is quite strong, but it is like the high-rolliest high roll of all of these abilities that we've seen up to this point. And so, you know, I'm just really going to have to wait and see if there's a way to do something with, say, condense and condense the dragon a bunch of times and get this full board of Titanic allies. See if there's something to where we play the Titanic ally, get some kind of play effect, and then silence the ally so that it gets all of its stats back. Like, these combos sound like kind of interesting and strong, but they sound like they're more into that kind of like casual Timmy power gamer, like I just put a million chimes in my deck with Meduli type of thing, and not something that we're really going to be seeing in the competitive environment. Up next after that, we have Sephirsa, Scourge of the Deep. Nailed the name on the first try. And so that, we have a Sea Monster Dragon, 8 mana bro, 8/7 deep unit that when you spend mana to play another unit, create a random card in hand of equal cost. It costs 0 and is fleeting. And I'm not entirely certain what you're supposed to do with that ability. Like, this is, again, one of these spaces as to where You have a very expensive card, you play it, you expect to win the game. This card doesn't do it immediately. And so you play Sephirisa. You have to untap into the next turn, and then on that next turn, you just have to win the game. Maybe you win the game then, like you have to, right? If you're playing a 7 mana unit, generating a 7 mana card, and then playing it for free, that's the point where the game needs to end. But it doesn't necessarily do so. Now, the two things that I'm kind of interested in with this are number one, just Nautilus, right? You know, if we're playing Sephirsa for 4 mana, and then playing some other sea monsters for 2 or 3 mana and generating random cards along the way, you know, that's a thing for sure. But like, what game do you play Nautilus that you don't just win the game immediately anyways? And so, like, I'm not really excited about this in terms of Nautilus. I don't quite get it there. The next thing is to where I'm going to have to stop and read this again. Oh, okay. So it's when you spend mana. And so I had to stop and think. I was like, so you play this unit for free, then you get the 0 mana card, you play the 0 mana card, and the 0 mana card generates like the 0/1 turret, and then you play the 0/1 turret. Like, you know, you can chain off all the zeros, but you have to legitimately spend mana. So thought number 2 is off the table. I don't really see what this unit's going to do. It's in that real, you know, high rolly space of Bilgewater, but it doesn't feel like that high roll is really that big. Moving forward, we have the Shadow Isles Edition, the Spectral Ironhound, a 5/3 for 6 mana. To play it, kill an ally just like the Shuriman Friend, and then when I'm summoned, you summon a 1,000-clawed Deathwinder, which is this 8/4 fearsome over to the right. And so just in terms of raw stats, you know, this is an incredibly powerful deal. We got eight stats on the Iron Hand. We have 8 stats on the Clawed Death Render. That's 16. And then you have the 4 health on the Deathwinder. So it's 20. So 20 stats off of a 6 mana unit. Pretty good deal. You know, no complaints about that. It does tie into a lot of those Shadow Isles based synergies to where you're trying to kill off your own units to some kind of effect. And then it also has the summon ability attached to it. And so if you're able to kill this unit and resummon it, you're going to be getting more copies of these 1,000-clawed Deathwinders. So if you're playing, say, like the Kindred spell, right, to where you kill a unit and then immediately bring it right back, that's going to give you another copy of this 8/4 unit. And so, you know, it has some potential. It has some options. I think you can use it with the stuff that just summons units directly from your hand. And so there are some of those, like the 8 mana Shadow Isles unit that you play it and then you put a unit from your hand into play. Like, I think you can use that with the Iron Hound and then get additional copies of the 1,000-clawed Deathwinder. There should be just summon combos with this guy, right? Some things you should be able to do with that to where you're generating a big mountain of value out of the Deathwinder. And I think that that's where the value is really going to lie, where we, you know, looked at the Shurima card and said, okay, it has Spell Shield. I'm going to play this with Atrocity, and hopefully that's enough. The same thing can be said with the Spectral Ironhound. The quality of the Spectral Ironhound is going to, like, rely on your ability to sacrifice it and resummon it. I don't know how much there is to really make it worthwhile. Like, do I want to play Chronicler of Ruin, right? That's the 4/4 mana, the 4 mana 3/3 that when you play it, you kill a unit and immediately resummon it. No, that's not quite good enough. I need better cards than that. And so that's what really gives me, you know, a bit of strain with something like the Spectral Ironhound. I'm not denying that the ability is not powerful. I feel like the support around it is what really needs a bit of assistance. Because, like, I don't know. Like, would I play a 20/20 for 6 mana? Like, I don't know, maybe. That's just the kind of spot you land in when it comes to looking at these kind of like vanilla statted units. Is like, would I do something completely obnoxious, like play a 20/20 for 6 mana? Maybe. I don't know. You just block it with your 1/1, right? It's not that big of a deal. And so I think this one needs some help. I'm not impressed just playing this as a slay activator, right? Killing off a unit to get the ability. I think you really need the blink style of effects to make this pop off. And I'm not certain exactly what those look like at the moment. Last but not least, the final new card, we have the Veiled Protector, a 4/5 for 5 mana that when summoned, so when it actually comes into play, or when you summon a Titanic ally, heal your Nexus for 3. And with this, I'm just not impressed. I'm never particularly impressed by heal-based cards. You know, this has been the the MO of Cosmic Call decks for the past 4 or 5 months or so or whatever, to where you just play a bunch of heal and hope that you survive long enough to do your big and powerful thing. This guy ties into that same thing, but all of the other dumb heal cards just do stuff better, right? I don't want to be playing this 4/5 landmark. The problem with this is, I think I can word it better. The problem with this is, if you look at a card like the 1/4 Stellacorn, whatever it's called, the 1/4 2 mana heal every turn, that helps you get to your end goal, right? You play your unit, you dardle around for an extra 3 or 4 turns. It helps you get to your end goal of playing your expensive unit. You win the game as soon as you play your expensive card, right? The problem with the Veiled Protector is you put it on the board and it doesn't help you not die, right? Sure, it helps you not die in the sense that it immediately gains you 3 health, but you're playing the card that immediately wins you the game. You don't care about that 3 health that it just gained you. You needed the 3 health to get you to the point to where you're playing the expensive card. You don't need the health after you play the expensive card. And so the little Stella Cord helps you to that end, and that it stalls out the game to where you play your expensive card and just win. But the Veiled Protector helps you after you play your expensive card, at which point it's just too late. So moving forward into the standard adjustments, do you think we're going to get some Janna-based changes? I'm on yes. I've already seen the patch notes, so I know. And there are some rolling through. So number one, Divine Whirlwind only deals 1 damage to the Nexus now instead of 2. I think that's a fairly reasonable update, especially as Aikaido was the one that kind of explained it on the on the podcast he's on. God, I could never remember the name. The one with him and Drissoth and Biotac. It's Insider Knowledge. There we go. But as he explained it on there, like, especially once they kind of figured out that you can play the elephant, the elemental elephant that gives you the spells back, like, you just know that you're going to be able to deal like 8 burn to your opponent with the Divine Whirlwinds, in the sense that you play the 2 whirlwinds and you play an elephant and get a whirlwind back, and those chains just do so much damage. And so I think this is a very good update. It still gives you potential to do neat things with the whirlwind, like activate a plunder, but it doesn't give you that oops, I win aspect that you get when you're able to chain off a bunch of these. And so I think this is a very good update. It's not enough to, completely knock Nyla Janna out of the game, but it gets you to the point to where you have to start making decisions in terms of your removal spells. Do I rather play Divine Whirlwind, which doesn't deal as much damage to the Nexus now, but you get the 3 damage at fast speed, which is very relevant, or would I rather play Slow Whirlwind, which takes a bit more wind up, it's a slow spell, but it can take down much larger units. It gets you out of that space to where you just, like, you just go and Google search, damage, like, the Janna kit, you put everything in the kit in the deck, and then you just flesh out the remaining 9 to 11 spots. It makes you actually think a little bit more in terms of the deck building, and I like the change here. Up next, Cosmic Call changed to what I thought this card actually did. What I was thinking when this card was released, I thought this was an either-or kind of thing. I thought you got to spend 2 mana and invoke for an expensive thing, or you got to pay 8 mana and reduce the cost of your Celestials. I did not realize when this card was initially shown to us that it was both, right? You either spent 2 mana for the big invoke, or you got to do the half cost and get the big invoke. Like, I did not realize that's how it worked, so I initially ranked this card pretty low. And so now that we're in that space of the initial bust version of the card to where it's an invoke or a cost reducer, I think that this is probably enough to just knock Cosmic Call completely out of the meta. And so I think the way it still has a chance, the way it still has a shot, was the way I kind of look at Cosmic Call in the space of Eternal right now is the Victor version is best. Like, the Zoe Victor version is the best one. If you really want to go out of your way to shore up your matchups against aggro, then you can start to include Aphelios. And so, like, Victor is like the tier 1, the Aphelios is like tier 1.25 for specific matchups that you're looking to do better against. All the other versions are just worse. Like, the Samira versions are just worse. Like, you're just stretching on how powerful the Cosmic Call was, and you're playing a bunch of bad decks that were here hopefully just to support it. But now that that is kind of, off the table, I think that there is still some opportunity for the Victor versions to be an effective deck. but I don't think that all those fringe versions that were just trying to take advantage of triple Cosmic Call lineups are going to be able to make it in the best of three format. And then as you kind of move into that space, there are an absolute fuck ton of powerful things you can do with both Zoe and Victor in the space of Eternal. And is Cosmic Call it? I'm kind of up in the air. I think, depending on how slow the format gets and how mid-rangey the format looks, then you can start to fit these cosmic callbacks decks back in, because there's no denying this is one of the absolute most powerful things you can do, and this really set the barrier in terms of like how slow your control deck could be. Because if you're playing a control deck slower than Cosmic Call, you just automatically lost, and so you couldn't play things like Nora Vagar because they were slower than Cosmic Call. And so this gets it into that space to where that barrier is pushed back a few more turns. It does open up the space to where more control decks can fit in the format, but will the format be slow enough to where Cosmic Call can fit in? I doubt it. I don't think that's going to be a thing. I think it's probably just completely off the table at this point without the addition of some more Invoke support in the game. So up next, big change to Janna. She now needs 8 cards to see the reduction instead of 6. A very big change to her. If you catch our videos on the regular, I did just put out a pre-patch Janna Samira video, and it was pretty bonkers, the nonsense that we were able to pull off with both Samira and Janna in terms of getting them to flip and doing nonsense with Sunken Temples. This was a change that needed to happen. I was ultimately super surprised that Janna didn't get ticked up to 7 in the balance patch, and then you can kind of see if she's still too powerful, and then you still have the option to tick her up to 8. And so I don't think this by any stretch of the means takes Janna out of the format. I think Janna is still going to be one of the absolute most powerful things that you can be doing in Standard. I think that that's going to translate quite well into the space of Eternal, and what I think we'll ultimately see with Janna is she's going to function more within Sunken Temple based decks and not so much in the really like high powered aggro Nyla decks. And so there was that kind of like line in the sand between playing the Nyla decks that had like the 1-drop and you dropped the boat pretty quick out of the deck, but you had that more aggressively oriented Janna deck. And then on the other side, you had the control version with the Elephant and the Sunken Temples. I think the Elephant version is still alive and well. It's not really suffering from these changes to Janna, but the decks that really kind of needed that 1 or 2 extra card draw, or they needed that elusive attack out of Janna, those are the ones that are really going to suffer from this change, especially with the nerf to Divine Whirlwind. And so I think she's still going to be around. She's not going anywhere. We're still going to do a bunch of obnoxious things with Janna, especially as we're about to come into this Eternal season. But again, those the aggro decks are the ones that are going to suffer. The slower, grindier versions of things are still going to be completely fine with her costing 8, or her flipping at 8 instead of flipping at 6. Up next, we have another big change. Champion strength goes up to 9. And so this will be the question. Is this finally the death knell of champion strength? And so it was initially an 8 mana 4/4, give your units scout rally. That was deemed too good, so they kicked it up to 9. That was deemed too good, so they kicked it back down to 8, but took the scout aspect of it away. Now it's back up to 9 with only the 4/4 and the rally. And so I think this just kind of is what it is. Like how powerful do we really think 9 mana spells should be? Should a 9 mana spell directly end the game? Probably not, but Champion Strength doesn't do that. And if we look at the space of like 12 mana spells like Feel the Rush or War Mother's Call, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, how much better is Champion Strength than those? And I don't think that's like a fair direct comparison, since a card like Feel the Rush doesn't require any setup to where a card like Champion Strength does, but I still don't think this is enough to really knock it out of the format. I was kind of more interested in Champion Strength giving +3/+3 but remaining at 8 mana. So as you set up these big attacks with your full 6-unit board, you only got to deal 6 less damage, making it much more challenging to deliver OTKs, and then also lining up thematically with 4 Demacia, right? The namesake of 4 Demacia, like the number 4 Demacia, is where you get the 4/4 coming out of the Champion Strength. It was just some dumb meme at Riot, and that devolved into being one of the more obnoxious cards of the recent times, but I think giving it the +3/+3 tieback would have been a much more appropriate nerf than going up to 9 mana. But I think this will still see play. The question to me is: are we in a spot to where champion strength is worse than Golden Aegis? And I don't think we've reached that barrier yet. And so I think this is still going to see play. It's still going to be a very relevant deck in the meta, as we saw this previous meta, to where champion strength wasn't completely overrunning. You didn't see triple champion strength lineups coming their way into the open events. Like the Janna version was kind of on the radar, but not super hard. It was really just scouts. I think that we do push further away to where you're only playing one good champion strength deck, but I don't think this is enough to really knock it out of the format. Scrolling down into the buff section, Swain, can't quite see, but he reduces from 16 damage down to 14. This was made available due to the nerf to the Tentacle Idol, which is fine. I think the Tentacle Idol really powering up Swain was a bit obnoxious. You had so many games to where you played a Tentacle Idol, and that was 6 level ups to Swain. You played 2 Tentacle Idols, and you basically just like free leveled Swain by the time he hit the board. That was the main problem to the Swain kit, was that you very realistically high roll and have a flipped Swain on turn 5, and that was just way too much. And so with the nerf to Idol, to where it only has 4 health instead of 5, it only deals 4 damage over the course of its lifespan, I think it was fair to bring Swain back down, because Swain wasn't the problem, right? The Idol was the problem, and so that gets him into a much better space. Up next, we have the Rico Rex card of the set, Dame the Despoiler, collecting Overwhelm. And I'm very interested. This is a card that I've thought has been kind of like fringe playable as it is, and delivering that grant all allies +1 attack is quite strong. And so giving your 4 Overwhelm bros +1 attack gets you up to a 10 stat unit that's just kind of close enough to good on its own. I think Dame might have the opportunity to make his way into standard. The downside for Dame is that Samira got nerfed, right? This is in the Samira kit. Samira's flares costing 2 mana now makes it tough to want to come in and activate cards like this, because it's so expensive to do. And so we'll see how it plays out. Giving Samira +1 attack does make her a combat monster. And so I can definitely see some like Samira Gnar Overwhelm style Rico Rex decks making their way through the meta. It's one of the decks that I actually recommended a few seasons ago in the place of something like Darius Gnar. And so I don't know if Dame is enough to really kind of like push it over the edge, but he definitely strikes me as better than a card like Noxus Chariot, whatever the fucking 4/3 thing is called, right? This card just has to be way better than it. And with the Noxus Chariot 3 mana thing being on the table, as a playable card within Darius Gnar, then I think Dame is going to make the cut, especially if you say, well, we have like the 2 mana Overwhelm unit that, or the 2 mana guy that does a damage to everything, and that starts to activate on turn 5 to where you can play him, deal the damage, then play Dame as well. I think he's definitely going to have a bit of sway if that card is good enough. Up next, Dedicant of the Challenge, still garbage. Updrafting your whole hand away to draw 2 cards is still pretty whatever. He was a somewhat interesting option in the face of Jinx, giving you the guaranteed level up, but like, what are you really doing with this thing? Like, what makes this like sequence look good? Okay, you updraft away 6 cards. You have an 8/8 for 4 mana that doesn't have Overwhelm, Elusive, or Rally, so it just gets shut down in every combat. And then you only get to draw 2 cards off of that. And so you updrafted 6 cards away. You got that 6 stats, but you're down -4 cards now. That sounds like garbage. The even space to where you updraft 2 cards away to draw 2 cards to make a 4/4 for 4 mana doesn't feel worth it. And then if you have 0 cards in hand, playing a 2/2 that draws 2 cards isn't worth it either. And so the problem to me isn't the stat line on Dedicant of the Challenge. It wasn't that point of health that he's lacking. He really needs to pick up some kind of combat ability to make him worthwhile, or just play Sunken Temple. If you're really wanting to updraft that hard, just play Sunken Temple. Sunken Temple is a card I'm actually kind of surprised we're not seeing within the set here. Up next, we have the Protective Broodfather, now Titanic, up to an 8/8 space. And I'm interested, not in the current set, but Riot is clearly alluding to some shit, right? As we come up here and look at all of these new cards that we're getting here, the Noxus Dragon, Rusticle's unfortunately not a dragon, but Chemtech Drake Dragon, Broad Weird Dragon, Portia Dragon, Scourge of the Deep Dragon. We got Dragon. That has to be a direct indicator that we're going to be seeing dragon stuff in the upcoming set. And so now that we have dragon stuff becoming into relevance, making this unit a Titanic relevant, having these just ultra heavy high rolls to where the Protective Broodfather rolls into another Titanic unit, like this has a lot of opportunity in a future set. And so I'll be curious to see what Riot is currently trying to set up with these cards in terms of the dragon themes. I'm sure the Day of Descent or the Dragon's Descent will be a thing. I know that there was a TFT season that was dedicated to dragons. I bet that we're about to see that turn up in the space of Legends of Runeterra. And if that's going to be a thing, this card is definitely going to have some relevance. And so right now, not so much. A month down the road, we're going to have to circle back to the Broodfather and see what he's able to do. Next, we have this beautiful space to where the card images didn't load. Tryndamere catches 2 points of health. That's fine. That wasn't what was really holding Tryndamere back. You're just playing him with Feel the Rush. He didn't care about his stat line as it is. This is fine. It makes a card we weren't playing better. War Mother's Call. This is a very interesting one. Going from 12 mana down to 11, now castable on turn 8. And again, I don't think that this is going to be enough to put it into the meta, though to me the War Mother's Call always struggled in the sense that you need to play a bunch of cheap bad cards in your deck to get to that turn 8, turn 9 to make this relevant. And so you're playing Omen Hawks, you're playing the ramp 2 and 3 mana units. You're not playing the top end that you want to hit off of War Mother's Call. And so whenever you actually cast it, it always just felt like kind of a high roll. And so as you're out here like navigating this world of Rite of Negations and Denies, and you're high rolling while you're at it, it just never felt worthwhile, especially as Big Brother Feel the Rush was always out there and available. And so I'm kind of curious if taking this down to a castable on turn 8 makes it relevant. I'm still leaning towards no. But this certainly gets it in the space as to where it might have a bit of constructed relevance. Moving down to the next one, Commander Ladros gets +1 attack. Fine, whatever, that wasn't what was holding you back either. He does have the note in here that as he comes down and axes your opponent from 20 to 10, he can now lethal your opponent from 10 to 0 in one fell swoop. But that's not what this really comes down to. Is just this kind of like ultra grindy style of playing the Last Breath Commander Ladros over and over and over again hasn't really been a successful thing. The place that you have to start to kind of be curious with the commander, I guess, is back to that space of Atrocity, as to where you can now play the Commander Ladros. He axes half of your opponent's health. Then you Atrocity the Commander Ladros at your opponent's face to get the kill. That is a thing, but is that directly better than playing Nasus? Is that directly better than that new Shurima unit that we just saw? That's pretty up in the air for me, because the value cycles out of Commander Ladros getting last breaths and dying and coming back and dying and coming back, that hasn't been relevant since Foundations. And so I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I don't think this is enough to make Commander Ladros competitive relevant, but it starts to get to that place to where you might kind of think about it, right? You might play your Nasus Atrocity deck and play one copy of Commander Ladros just because. It doesn't strike me as that kind of like build around capacity that you're really looking for out of a 9 mana unit. Or just concurrent timelines, right? He can come back to his old state because of concurrent timelines. But moving forward, Necrotic Arachnoid now has Fearsome. Fine, whatever. I've never been in a situation to where I wanted this card. The people that have found some fringe success with the Necrotic Arachnoid have been using it for the Drain ability, as opposed to the Spider Generation Big Boy kind of thing. And so, again, I don't think this is going to be relevant. If you're looking at Eternal, you can play the constructed capable Drain unit. Nightshade Overseer. What is he, like the 2/6 for 6 mana? He can still make the cut, but the Necrotic Arachnoid I don't think is going to be relevant there. He's going to be like a one of in a Nico deck in Standard or something, and not something that's a real game changer. Giving it Fearsome doesn't really kick it over the edge in anything, in my opinion. Moving forward, more non-picture kind of cards. Spirit Leech now has a second health. That's fine. It does give it a little bit more opportunity to compete with Glimpse Beyond as the premier draw 2 coming out of Shadow Isles. But I don't think it's enough to really change the pacing of things. I think the Slay decks were making the decision of, do I want a 2-mana spell or do I want a unit that gives me this draw 2 ability? And you have space in your deck for like 4. And so you were playing like 3 Glimpse Beyonds because it was cheaper and a spell. And if your opponent Vengeances your unit, you can Glimpse Beyond it away. Or if you're getting into combat with a Lifesteal unit, you can Glimpse Beyond it away. And then only if you were in that space to where it's like, well, I really want more units in my deck, that's where the Spirit Leech came in. I don't think the thing that was holding the Spirit Leech back was that point of health. I think the thing that was holding it back is both the mana price and the versatility that we got out of Glimpse Beyond. Moving forward, the Aether Fiend gets +1/+1. That's fine. I've tried to find ways to fit Aether Fiend into decks. I've just never wanted it. It feels like something that should be kind of relevant, given that it is a removal spell attached to a unit, and that's typically just good enough. But he hasn't quite made his way to relevance yet. Again, I don't think the thing holding it back was its stat line. I think the thing holding it back was its price. Oh, whoa, shit. Hang on. The price got updated as well. Maybe this does get to swing into relevance now that it's a vengeance priced unit. And so I take that back, Aether Fiend. I gotta look you up. I need the picture. Hang on. And so there we go. We got him on the screen now. So he went from being a 6/4/7 mana to being a 5/3/6 mana. Okay, that's more agreeable. I can definitely see the Aether Fiend making the cut somewhere. I've had like slight inclinations with the Aether Fiend in the past, just being like, oh, it's a bird, I'm going to play it in my Warden of the Tribes deck, but it's nothing that I've really considered as being like a big build around kind of card. But being at that price point now, to where its vengeance price does get it into the realm of playability. I think the downside with the Aether Fiend has been kind of as we were talking about that space of Glimpse Beyond, to where you can kind of like counterspell stuff. You can counterspell this playability on the Aether Fiend. So you play the Aether Fiend, you try to kill off your Cursed Keeper to kill off one of your opposing units, and then your opponent Mystic Shots your Cursed Keeper and you lose out on the kill ability. That is the actual disaster for the Aether Fiend. And so I'm curious if he can't like fit himself in a little bit better at this price point, in the sense that maybe now you play 2 Vengeances and 1 Aether Fiend, or you play 2 Vengeances, 2 Aether Fiend, or you play 3 Vengeances, and then your 4th Vengeance is just the 1 copy of Aether Fiend. Now, it's much more palatable at 6 mana than it is at 7, and maybe it fits in as a relevant thing. I don't think it's really going to make the space, at least in Eternal, maybe in Standard, but the price reduction is actually a big deal. And so moving on, we have Seal in Steel. I didn't entirely understand what's going on, because I'll be honest with you, I've cast this card a total of 0 times in my life. Maybe that's not accurate. I feel like I might have generated this card and cast it before. But reading the patch note on it, it says it's a tempting effect, but it hasn't managed to darken, like the darken units, the doorstep of any viable decks, partly because of how hard it is to use the resulting equipment. While the cost reduction here will naturally make the equipment easier to play, there might be a certain Demacian who takes a particular interest in this new, easier to catch shape. And so, I don't completely understand what this is without seeing the corrupted form, right? It's alluding to the equipment is now going to cost 2 mana, since you can now tumble it or catch it with Vayne, right? Vayne being a Demacian champion of interest, to catch the shape, needing a 1 or 2 mana equipment. And so maybe the Seal in Steel is 2 and then the equipment is 2. And I'm trying to think if that gets it into the realm of playability. I'm not really excited about that, but I guess the next piece is they're saying darkened stuff. Is the corrupted form now a darkened equipment? So you can use it in an Aatrox deck to where it's a darkened card with the Seal in Steel. I don't completely understand everything happening in this change. It's too hard to take out of context without seeing what the corrupted form actually is. But imagining everything there is correct, that it creates a 2 mana Darken equipment, do we still want to play this card? And that's, pretty tough. I'm not sold on this. It needs to be in that space to where you're obliterating an ally that you don't actually want, right? So when you obliterate it, you're not getting a last breath effect. So killing off a random last breath bro doesn't do anything in terms of also getting that last breath effect. So that kind of fails. That leaves you starting to think of cards like Camaveran soldiers generating that off unit, and then you sacrifice that off unit to the seal and steel, and like that's kind of a thing, but that is just like so mega engine-y for so little payoff that I don't really see it. And so I'm not certain what this is supposed to do. It doesn't strike me as being a viable card in literally anything. And so we'll see. I don't get the darken effects. I don't get the tie-in to Vayne, but it just seems like it's a terrible card. Like I have to start to think in my head, like, would I play this if the equipment costs 0 mana? Probably, maybe. It gets it into the realm of maybe, I should say. Like, I don't want to play it as a bad counter spell, right? It's like the first thing that comes to head is like, all right, well, opponent Mystic Shots my unit and I seal and steal it, so I get some stats back out of it. But that still sounds kind of shitty. And so without any kind of like real combos with this thing, I'm not certain where I stand. It just doesn't seem like a card that's ever going to make it. And so, moving out of the standard space and into Eternal, the Star Tip Peak has been nerfed from 1 mana back up to 2, which seems fine to me. I thought it seemed a little bit overpowered at 1 mana, given that things like the Charger were exceptionally good, the big one being the Serpent, reduced in cost to 0 at some other point, and so having like 0 cost serpents and moon silvers, you had like a very high quality collection of cards coming out of the Star Tip Peak that drawing for 1 mana on its own is probably fair, right? You play the Star Tip Peak, it counts down, you get some cards later on. That's a fair price to pay, but once they start like tying into other synergies, be that like Celestial Behold activations or Cosmic Calls or created cards for Zoe, like created cards for Augment and created cards for Victor, like that's where it starts to just be like a little bit too much. And so I feel like in a vacuum of generating 2 Celestials for 1 mana a little bit later is probably fair, but when you get to tie in all of the other combos, it's probably a little bit overtuned. And so moving forward, we have the Bandle Tree, the classic bring it back card that everyone talks about. I'm kind of interested in the Bandle Tree. Now, I don't think the Bandle Tree can ever be a constructed staple in terms of the OTK deck, right? There was the Bandle Tree deck, the Bandle Tree control deck. I think that really popped off at Worlds in 2001, if memory serves. I don't really watch Worlds then, since we were probably just playing Expedition, but I feel like there was a Worlds that was completely dominated by the Bandle Tree, and that was mainly in part due to there not being any landmark destruction. And so now that the Explorers are around, I don't think Bandle Tree ever gets the opportunity to be that top tier deck. It's too much of an investment to fight for the OTK in a world of Explorers. And so that's not to say you can't play the Vandal Tree as a value card and then occasionally / rarely get the kill off of the thing. And I think that's the space that we're going to see it in now. And so the question starts to become, like, when you have the Bandle Tree at 3 mana, is this create a follower from a new region in hand every turn enough to warrant out of a landmark, right? So essentially draw a random unit every turn of the game, maybe get an OTK like 15% of the time. And that's where I kind of land in uncertainty. It's probably not, right? Just like if you were generating like a very specific subset of cards, then maybe, right? If it said generate a Yordle, generate a multi-faction unit, like generate a Mecha Yordle, if you knew the very specificity of what you were going to be getting out of the Bandle Tree, I could see that being a relevant thing. But just like playing the Bandle Tree and being like, all right, well, here's a Legion Rearguard on turn 7, and then on turn 8 you generate some random like 8 mana dude, right? It's just like the variety in what you can hit is so far and beyond. I don't think that that's going to be a thing. And so I don't have high expectations for the Bandle Tree. I just don't think that it's going to get the protection it needs. Now, someone may come out here and have their their Bandletree Shurima spell shieldy thing to make it survive. Like maybe there's some game there, but I don't think it's I don't think it's going to be that meta staple that we saw coming out of the formats of old. Moving forward, Katarina catches a point of attack. I think that's fine. You know, Katarina got tuned and tuned and tuned, and I think it's fair to say that the big problem with Katarina was not her. The problem with Katarina was the opulent foyer that generated things on attack token. And I think that, you know, once Riot has seen how obnoxious that is, that they're just not going to do that anymore. And I don't think we've seen it since. I can't remember if we've seen any of the attack token cards come back since the opulent foyer, but I'm pretty sure everything is worded that if you started the turn with the attack token, do this effect, and that's the only time that you get it, so that you don't get all of these bonus effects off of scout units. You can't scout unit Cataclysm and then get like 3 attacks in a turn to generate 3 tokens off the foyer. The same thing applies to Katarina. If they said, oops, we learned from our mistake, we're not printing those cards anymore, or we're not wording them that way anymore, then it's probably safe to start bringing Katarina back up in power level. And so I think this is a fair update to her. It's very nice that she just doesn't die to Quietus now. I think that's a very powerful update to her, as Quietus is a removal spell that's much more prevalent in Eternal, I think, than it is in Constructed. Moving forward, the Preservationist, now a 4 cost instead of a 5, and that turns this into a fairly real unit, right? It's a 4/4. I know you can't see the picture on the screen, but it's a 4/4 now for 4 mana that does a countdown 2 onto a landmark. And you know, just being in the space of saying like this is a combat monster with some upside definitely gives it the opportunity to show up. And so I'll be curious to see if Grandpa Roji doesn't come out and make some kind of Talia Malphite with the Preservationist in it now that it's a real unit. Or I'm curious if it doesn't fit into some kind of space of like aggro Ziggs. But you know, one way or another, a 4 mana for 4/4 is a good deal. A 4 mana 4/4 with upside attached to it is very real as well. And so I'm curious to see if this can't be kind of a sleeper hit in this upcoming format, because I think that cost reduction is one of the stronger ones of the patch notes. Moving forward, another very high impact cost reduction in the Desert's Wrath. This is the Azir card that summons 2 Sand Soldiers and then gives all of your Sand Soldiers +1 attack for the remainder of the game. This is an exceptionally powerful update, moving from 4 mana to 3. We've seen this like very, 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 very important space in the price of spells at 3 to 4, right? Whenever you have a 3 mana card that gets upped in cost to 4, it typically nerfs it to oblivion. And the only cards that we've really seen survive that have been rallies. And so whenever we had some kind of combat trick that was too good, it went from 3 to 4, it just fell off the face of the earth. Whatever that, like stand tall, stand united, done. Like riposte, pretty much done. Like just every time you see this like 3 to 4 change, it's just completely gone. But like taking Desert's Wrath from 4 down to 3 immediately brings it into combat relevance. And so I'm curious to see if this isn't something that the Azir Sand Soldier deck really needed, whether or not that is the classic Azir Irelia or one of the more fringe style of decks like Azir Hecarim or Azir Lucian. This is just like such an incredibly relevant upgrade for Azir that I'm curious to see if this is not enough to bring the Sand Soldiers to the forefront. Again, it's so hard to stress how important dropping to 3 mana is, since you just get to play it purely off of banked spell mana. Up next, same thing applies to the Spirit Portal, going from 4 mana to 3. This was a card that has seen fringe play across the courses of time, giving bonuses typically to Daring Poros coming off of Poro Cannons, and then Flame Chompers. And so as that deck has kind of been a thing, to where you have your Poro Cannons at 0 mana generating Daring Poros, and then you have your Flame Chompers. The Spirit Portal was kind of like a fringe playable card in that space. It was a discard activator that could give your Chompers some attack to kill units and give your Poros some bonuses. But the thing to take note of with the Spirit Portal is it's a permanent bonus. So you grant all of your allies +1/+1, not +1/+1 for the end of the round. And again, being in that 3 mana space is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so I'm curious to see if this can't make its way in. Like I've been right on the fringe of Bandle City discard being a thing. I thought it was going to get there when Returno Wrench had the impact instead of the +1 health. That nerf really kind of knocked it out of oblivion, but I felt like Bandle City discard strategies has just been like so close to popping off. And the Spirit Portal being in that relevant discard space gets it back into that potential. And so we'll have to see. We'll have to see if we can't brew up something for the Champion Draft Series with this one, with the amount of Bandle City that we have running around. But continuing on back into the space of no picture land, They Who Endure drops down to 6 mana. Very relevant. This was one of the kind of premier game closers in days of old. I could certainly see They Who Endure making a return to relevance at some point, and dropping down to 6 cost is a way to certainly make that happen. I'm sure Rico Rex, the supreme overwhelmed master of the world, is already brewing up They Who Endure. Again, will it make a gigantic impact on the meta? It's hard to tell. Does it land closer to the space of relevance being a 6 mana card? Absolutely. Moving down to the Frenzied Skitterer, this is one that hits close to home with me. I am a very big supporter of the Nocturne-based Fearsome's deck, and making the Frenzied Skitterer a little bit more resilient is always relevant. And so he's always been in this kind of interesting space to where the 2 health doesn't matter that much against units, in the sense that you're making a fearsome attack. If your opponent can block a fearsome, they can kill the Skitterer anyways, but it does give him relevance now in, say, blocking Maryam, and now being able to block kill Maryam so she can't attack into it, and then doing stuff like surviving Mystic Shots. And so very relevant upgrade. There's I don't think Nocturne Fearsome should be a fringe deck, but it kind of is. Spiders doesn't make as much relevance in the space of constructed, but this is just a very high powered effect, especially as we start to look through these cards. And we've said Fearsome quite a few times as we go through these. You had the Dune Swallower with Fearsome. You had the Thousand Clawed Deathwinder with Fearsome. I feel like there might have been another buffed card with Fearsome as well, things like Necrotic Arachnoid. And so, this is one of these kind of death by 1,000 cuts kind of things. If we're talking buffs, what's the equivalent? Like the Band-Aid of 1,000 cuts, you're the salve of 1,000 cuts, right? The resurrection of 1,000 cuts, if you will, is to where you make these minor upgrades to a card. Doesn't seem that relevant. The next patch comes out, you make a minor upgrade to a Fearsome. Doesn't seem that relevant. The next patch comes out, you make another minor update to a Fearsome. Doesn't seem that relevant. The next patch comes out, you print like 2 Fearsome cards, and you're like, holy fuck, we went over the top, right? And so as we see this build up of Fearsomes happen and more Fearsomes come about, having this Frenzied Skitter as a unit that highly activates with Fearsomes, giving all the opposing units -1 attack while also being a relevant attacker, really just builds up to that salve of 1,000 heals, if you will, in terms of making that Fearsome deck a real thing. And so very powerful upgrade, one that I'm interested in seeing how it plays out. Moving forward, we have the Tornado Warrior, previously a 2/2, so it was essentially a 3-mana 2/2 with some recall shenanigans, now a 1-mana 1/1, and so essentially a 2/1 for 1 mana that gets a keyword as it comes down onto the board. And I think this brings more interesting possibilities, right? If you're looking at Bandle Swarm decks, they're happy to have this very cheap unit. This is a Yordle. As we spoke to our salve of 1,000 heals with Yordles, the previous patch had 2 Yordle updates. We have another new Yordle buff. We'll probably see some more Yordle cards in the next patch. Very interesting to see these kind of things roll through. And this space is to where he starts to become relevant in recall decks as well, right? You're not really feeling good about recalling 2-mana units and replaying them, but being in that 1-mana space, it is much more relevant. And so while it's not going to be like, wow, I'm recalling a dancing droplet and drawing cards off of this, it does still, fit into that space to where you don't feel terrible about recalling a unit when it only costs 1 mana. So maybe you do have a Kennen on board and this Tornado Warrior down. You don't care about the Kennen spell, and so you play your Lightning Rush on the Tornado Warrior, return it to hand, replay it, and now you have a little bit more relevant aggression, right? And so it's not, a big thing. It's not a big upgrade, but it's again that salve of 1,000 heals that really starts to add up over time and come together into some quite relevant space. And so, moving forward, the last handful of updates, a big, gigantic one. We saw the nerf to Cosmic Call. If you're nerfing Cosmic Call, I feel like you have to nerf concurrent timelines, and that's what we see here. I think this is a very interesting wording. This is essentially the version that I believe Drissoth proposed, in the sense that you grant your Nexus this plus this three stack thing, and that it only activates for your next 3 units. And so I think that with this, concurrent timelines probably could have dropped down to 1 mana back from 2. And it does give you this interesting thought process, right? Of, okay, I only get 3 activations out of my concurrent timelines. And so do I want to use it in the early game? So I play timelines on turn 2. I play my 1 mana weaponsmith, and the next turn I play my 3 mana weaponsmith, then I play my 4 mana weaponsmith. Now I'm completely done with my timelines. Or do I need to save it up, right? Do I want to play this later in the game, as I've played Trundle and now I want to hit the Ice Pillar off of the timelines? Like this it brings some interesting interactions into the timelines, and I think it's also interesting that you get to grant this to the Nexus. That opens up a lot of interesting design space in the future, I think. And so I think this is a great upgrade. It makes it also to where your second concurrent timelines isn't just discard fodder, right? You get to add these granted stacks onto your Nexus, and so you can play the additional timelines, and now you get upgrade number 4, 5, and 6. Like, everything about this upgrade just feels good. I just think that it could have dropped down to 1 mana from 2 now that this limited factor has been applied to it. And so I think the real question becomes, is concurrent timelines dead at this point? And I don't think it's as dead as Cosmic Call, but I think it's pretty close. The interaction between concurrent timelines and the Weapon Masters is kind of obnoxiously powerful, and that interaction with the Trundle landmark is as well. But on the whole, I think it's probably done. It's kind of one of those interesting cards, as to where I know I've talked about this a bunch in terms of Magic history, as to where there was the card Stoneforge Mystic. That's a card that tutored an equipment out of your deck, and then you could spend 2 mana and play the equipment instead of paying its actual cost. And so basically, once that card was printed, every equipment from that point forward had to be designed around the Stoneforge Mystic, until it eventually just got banned and everything. And that's the space that I felt like concurrent timelines was kind of in. It's like, I don't know if anyone like consciously thought that concurrent timelines Weapon Masters was a thing, but as soon as that came out, Riot had to be like, oh fuck, right? Like, anytime we want to print any of these like mass on summon kind of abilities, we have to now consider concurrent timelines, and that's just kind of a shitty space to be in. And so I'm glad to see the nerf finally come through. I'm glad to see the nerf come through in a space that doesn't completely annihilate the card, and now hopefully that opens back up multiple design spaces, right? In the space of also having this grant Nexus things, and then also in the do stuff on summon. Last but not least, Overgrown Snapvine. It switches from on summon to on play, but is now cheaper. I guess that's a thing. I know there's a lot of summon stuff to where you would say Vile Feast a unit with the Snapvine on board, and then that would come in as the 5/3. But the card has never really been constructed relevant. It's been a very big casual-based card, but not so much a competitive-based card. I don't think this is enough to push it into competitive play, even adding the Fearsome onto it, but we'll just have to wait and see. I'm just not excited about this in terms of what the Fearsomes can do. It's just kind of like, even being a playability now makes it worse. I don't think adding Fearsome and taking away Summon makes this card a buff. This actually feels like a nerf to me more so than an adjustment. And so we're getting here towards the end. The cards are all done. There's a new set of skins coming about, the Soundsmith patch, if you will, the sounds and sights of Runeterra. It had a clever name. I'm probably just out here butchering it. We should give it the serious name, if you will, the Remix Rumble skin line. And so there's a handful of skins down here. I was trying to think which of these were units that we already had skinned up and which weren't. I know that we have Bard. This is still kind of a cool one, though. Alawi, I think this is her first skin. Jen has one. I know Jen has Pulsefire. I'm not certain what the other ones may or may not be. Lulu already has 2, I think. I know she has Star Guardian. We typically use Star Guardian Lulu. Now she has an additional one. Moving down, Ziggs catches one as well. I think Ziggs had arcade Ziggs, right? The arcade seems about right with him, and so everybody kind of had one up to this point. I guess Alawi is the only new one, and so if your favorite champion got a new skin, sweet. If they did not, you know, keep playing Jax Orn out there, right? Jax Orn on the originals, they're not a part of the band, right? Nobody invited Jax Orn to be a part of the band, and so no new skins for them. Moving forward, I don't recognize this. It seems like I thought this was like a wrestler, right? Is this not how like Sting the wrestler dresses up? I don't know who this is. I thought it was Jin, but it seems like a Demacia champion. I don't get it. I don't know what that one. And then another Lulu Ziggs being friends one. All of those available within some kind of bundle. Another set of changes to competitive. I thought they moved the timing on the open. I don't think this is the case. I think I was wrong on the timing of the open, but it's on the 18th, 19th, and then the last chance qualifier is shortly after Thanksgiving for those of you Americans celebrating that thing. And then the Runeterra points cutoff is what I think this note about competitive was actually supposed to mean, relevant for very few of us. And so, if you do play that last chance qualifier, there are some things you can win. You get 3 wins, you get a special badge. If you get 8+ wins on day 1, you get the super secret badge. Way to go. Last but not least, I did scroll through the bug fixes. I didn't see anything relevant, and so I don't think any constructed playables were really affected here. And so, glad to be done with this, glad to be through. I'm starting to lose my voice, and so I'm glad we got there at the end. As we always say, agree or disagree. I'd love to hear it. If I missed something, please tell me about it. If there's a big combo I didn't see, I'd love to hear. And so that is going to do it for us today. So I hope everyone enjoyed the video. I hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way, and you had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.